cooperative case, or a law clerk who expected litigation experience, instead offering to do safe escort service during the blockade at Planned Parenthood last summer, and another ringing every judge in the state on a Sunday, with perfect golfing weather, I might add, to find one who would sign the injunction, an act that hardly endeared him to potential future employers. So it doesn't seem right somehow to accept an award of this magnitude for work I was going to do anyway, and had an amazing amount of help doing. She smiled, and I recognized the charming quirk of Eric's mouth. But my name's on the thing, so I guess I'll take it. She spoke for another 15 minutes, taking time to tell a brief story about each of 5 people she felt had made her work easier. She told funny and touching stories in a steady voice a few tones higher than Eric's low tenor. When she finished speaking, I joined Eric in standing and applauding enthusiastically. Sydney shook hands with the chairman, then her gaze sought out Eric. She smiled at him with genuine affection, then grinned as Eric bowed slightly, touching his forehead in a gesture of homage. Eric and I took our seats again and settled in for the final speech. I had enjoyed Sydney's wit and Eric's obvious pleasure. Now bored with my unending to-do list, I studied Sydney instead. Her brown hair had hints of gold and red, just like Eric's, and her jaw, though not so pronounced, looked as if it could set into the same stubborn lines Eric's sometimes took. Her laugh was higher and seemed to come more easily than his, and her hands were long and graceful. Eric's hands were large and beefy, the only things about him that weren't elegant, and he tended to put them in his pockets whenever possible. I studied people at the tables around us as well, looking for anyone I might know. I spotted another University of Chicago associate professor and recognized several more faces from campus, though I couldn't place them. They weren't in liberal arts, that I knew. The last speaker concluded, and during the final, somewhat weary applause, I folded my dinner napkin and took my last look around the room. People were shrugging into suit jackets and dresses swirled, and bright chatter was filling the banquet hall. Out of all that noise and motion, I saw one particular face for perhaps 2 seconds. It was enough. I heard her whisper from the past, "Say that you want me." "Sydney, this is Faith." "It's a pleasure and an honor," I said. I hoped that my expression and slightly clammy hands didn't reveal my churning stomach and pounding heart. "Likewise, certainly," Sydney said. Our handshake lasted long enough to surpass mere politeness. I knew that Sydney must meet hundreds of people a week, but her warm grasp was welcoming. I very rarely meet any of Eric's special friends. It was a diplomatic choice of words. Eric and I were close friends. Perhaps she spoke with him enough to know we weren't lovers. I had ceased to wonder at Eric's lack of sexual demands by learning that, despite some emancipated thinking about women's roles, he was old-fashioned about sex. I appreciated that and remained quite relieved. I wasn't ready for intimacy with him. I murmured something appropriate. My distress at the face I'd glimpsed receded under the warmth of Sydney's welcome. It did not go away entirely. An officious-looking aide of some sort hovered at Sydney's elbow. When she finally glanced at him, he whispered something and gave Eric and me a dark-eyed glance that implied Sydney had more important people to cultivate. Sydney looked annoyed but resigned. "Eric, if I don't mingle John the putada, will have an aneurysm." The clean-cut man at her elbow snorted and muttered something under his breath in Spanish. Sydney glared at him, and I had the feeling they interacted this way all the time. "Besides, chatting just isn't enough. Why don't you and Faith come to my place for dinner Sunday evening? Make it 6 and casual. It's been too long since we had a good talk." Eric glanced at me and smiled at my eager nod. "That would be great," he said. Then, as if he couldn't help himself, he swept Sydney into his arms for a hearty embrace. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "I mean it." Sydney had tears in her eyes when he let her go. She wished me a pleasant evening, then turned to meet 2 men the persistent John had ushered up to her. Braced by Eric's protective yet undemanding hand on my back, and the affectionate exchange I'd just witnessed, I felt able to face the banquet hall. It had emptied somewhat, and I kept my gaze lowered, not wanting to risk seeing that face again. I didn't want to remember or be the person I had been then. Eric was quiet in the car and seemed content with our conversation.